My name is Aubrey Stone. I am 29 years old, a ballroom dance instructor and the owner of my own studio, and until one Saturday night in October, under the lights of a regional dance championship, I believed the worst thing my husband had ever done to me was forget our anniversary 2 years running. I was standing in the wings of the ballroom, watching my students line up for their showcase number, when I glanced past the curtain into the crowd and saw him, Noah, my husband of 6 years, in the navy blazer I had picked out for him myself, his arm around a woman I didn't recognize, his hand resting low on her back with a tenderness I hadn't felt from him in longer than I wanted to admit. I told myself it was nothing. Then he leaned down and said something against her ear that made her laugh, the private kind of laugh you only give someone who already knows all your jokes, and I understood, standing there in a dress covered in someone else's sequins, that I was looking at a stranger wearing my husband's face. I did not walk out onto that floor. I did not scream his name in front of judges and 11-year-olds in rhinestones. I stood still behind that curtain, the way I had trained myself to stand still through every difficult moment of my adult life. And I watched him laugh with a woman who was not me, in a hotel he had chosen for reasons that had nothing to do with my students, and everything to do with the corporate conference his company was holding 2 floors above the ballroom that same weekend. That detail was the one that cracked something open in me. He had known his own company's conference was happening in this exact building, and had decided, with the confidence I used to find reassuring in him, that those 2 worlds would never touch. He had not been careless. He had been calculating. And for 6 years I had mistaken that calculation for the thing I loved most about him. We met when I was 23, newly certified and terrified of failing at the only thing I'd ever wanted since I was 7. Noah was 25, sharp and steady, climbing the ladder at a regional logistics company. He proposed on the same hardwood floor where I taught my first classes, and I said yes before he finished the sentence, certain the rest of my life was finally beginning. We opened my studio 3 years into the marriage, a loan co-signed by Noah and by his oldest friend, Tyler Reed, whose name sat beside mine on every document because that was what partnership looked like, or so I believed. Noah handled the bookkeeping in the early months, and I let him keep handling it long after I could have taken it over myself because it was easier, and because I trusted him with everything. Tyler had been part of our life since before our life existed, best friends with Noah since the 3rd grade, standing beside him at our wedding, becoming a fixture at every holiday and ordinary Sunday dinner for 6 years. He remembered things Noah forgot, recital dates, the anniversary of my father's death. I told myself it was friendship. I would spend a long time unlearning that. Noah's mother, Carol, had never quite treated me the way I imagined mothers-in-law were supposed to treat the woman their son married. She was polite at holidays, generous with gifts, and quietly, consistently protective of Noah in a way that sometimes felt less like love and more like management. The way a woman handles a business she still considers hers, even after handing over the keys. She called him twice a week, always in the evening, always for exactly long enough that I stopped asking what they talked about. The cracks did not arrive all at once. Noah's trips grew more frequent, always described in the same brisk tone. He started taking calls in the garage. He started angling his phone away from me at dinner. And Carol, who had never once called me directly in 6 years of marriage without Noah on the line first, began calling my cell instead of his on nights he was traveling, asking breezy, pointless questions about the studio, about my students, about anything except the son she was supposedly checking on. I noticed the pattern without understanding it. I thought she simply preferred me. I was wrong about that, the same way I was wrong about almost everything that year. 3 weeks before the championship, the studio's landlord called my cell, apologizing that the rent transfer had bounced. I knew for a fact the account should have covered 6 months of rent, let alone 1. I called Noah first. Probably a bank error, he said. Don't worry about it. The same phrase he'd used so many times I had stopped noticing how often worry was the thing he asked me not to do about my own business. I didn't call him again. That night, I logged into the studio's banking portal myself and read 3 months of transactions line by line, looking for the one number that didn't belong. I found transfers I didn't recognize, small enough individually to slip past a glance, adding up over 4 months to just under $11,000, rooted to a name I didn't know. Brianna Walsh. But underneath those transfers sat a second pattern I almost missed entirely, a string of smaller, recurring withdrawals every 10 or 12 days, each one processed through a payment platform I didn't recognize. Each one just small enough to look unremarkable on its own. The name Brianna Walsh meant nothing that first night. It would mean everything within the week. The second pattern would take longer to understand, and it would end up explaining almost everything else. I called Tyler, telling myself it was because he understood finance and had every right to know something was wrong with an account his own name was attached to. He came by the studio the next evening, and I watched his face change as I walked him through the numbers. "I need to tell you something," he said finally. "I ran into Noah downtown 2 months ago, at a table with a woman I assumed was a client, until I noticed his hand on hers between courses. I didn't say anything because I had no proof beyond a feeling, and because 20 years of loyalty to him made me hesitate. I should have told you the moment I saw it. I didn't blame him that night. I understood it because I'd spent 6 years doing exactly the same thing inside my own marriage, choosing peace over disruption." Over the following 2 weeks, Tyler traced the transfers to Brianna Walsh's account and matched the dates against Noah's supposed conferences, finding that nearly every transfer landed within a day of a trip he'd described to me. I recognized the name 3 days later, and recognizing it turned my stomach in a way the numbers alone hadn't. Brianna had been my student once, private lessons for almost a year before telling me, almost apologetically, that she was relocating for work. I remembered correcting her frame during a rumba, remembering how proud I'd been the day she finally nailed a difficult turn sequence. She had not relocated for a job. She had simply stopped needing lessons, because somewhere in that year of Tuesday evenings, my husband, who occasionally picked me up from the studio, had met her in my own lobby under my own lights. Tyler took longer to untangle the second pattern, the recurring withdrawals, and when he finally called me about it, his voice had a different weight to it than it had carried with Brianna's name. "It's an online card room," he said. "Poker mostly, sometimes sports contracts. He's been feeding it money for almost 2 years, small amounts most months, larger ones after what looked like bad stretches. Aubrey, I think the studio funds weren't only about Brianna. I think some of it was going toward covering losses he couldn't explain any other way." I sat with that for a long moment, because it reframed everything I thought I understood about the man I'd married. I had pictured a husband quietly building a second, softer life with another woman. What Tyler was describing was a man who had been quietly bleeding money for years, using an affair I hadn't yet confronted as convenient cover for debts I hadn't known existed at all. Both secrets tangled together so tightly that pulling one thread had exposed the other, whether he intended it or not. I sat with all of it for 2 days before deciding what to do, because I refused to let anger make my decisions. I wanted proof solid enough that Noah couldn't talk his way around any of it. And I wanted it before the championship weekend, because something told me that weekend mattered. 2 nights before the championship, I overheard Noah on a call in the garage, his voice low, the way it got when he thought I was upstairs. A room number, a floor. The conference dinner runs until 9, so we'll have the whole evening after. I stood frozen on the stairs and understood he wasn't planning another quiet betrayal. He was planning to bring her into the same building where I'd be standing on a ballroom floor, confident our 2 lives would never cross. The following afternoon, needing an excuse to be near Carol without raising suspicion, I stopped by her house to return a serving dish from a dinner weeks earlier. She wasn't home when I arrived, and her back door, the one she never locked, the one Noah and I had used for years to let ourselves in on Sunday afternoons, was open. I set the dish on her kitchen counter and would have left immediately if her phone, charging beside the coffee maker, hadn't lit up with a message from Noah still visible on the screen. "Tell her nothing if she calls. I've got it handled before Sunday." I stood in my mother-in-law's kitchen for a long moment, reading a sentence that confirmed, more completely than any bank statement could have, that Carol had known something worth hiding from me for long enough that her own son trusted her to keep hiding it on command. I did not confront her that day. I drove home instead, called Tyler, and told him what I'd seen. His voice went quiet in a way I was starting to recognize as the sound of him recalculating everything he thought he understood about the people around him, too. "She's been running interference for him," Tyler said. "The calls to your cell instead of his, making sure you never had a reason to ask him a hard question on the nights it mattered most. Aubrey, I think she's been doing that for longer than either of us has wanted to consider." I told him I needed one more piece before I did anything. And that piece was already waiting for me 2 floors above a ballroom, in a hotel Noah believed would keep his 2 lives permanently separated. Which is how I came to be standing behind that curtain Saturday night, watching my husband's hand find the small of a woman's back, in a hotel he'd chosen because he believed my attention would never leave that ballroom. I did not confront him. I finished the showcase, smiled through photographs, accepted congratulations I barely heard. I watched Noah leave around 8:30, his hand once again at Brianna's back as he guided her toward the elevators, and I let him go because I finally understood exactly what I needed to do. The conference closed Sunday evening with a formal dinner for senior staff and regional partners. The kind of dinner where a regional director hands out recognition awards to employees who've had a good year. Noah had mentioned it to me weeks earlier, offhandedly, the way a man mentions something he assumes his wife will never actually witness. I made sure I was in the room. I also made one phone call that morning I hadn't originally planned to make. To Carol, asking her, in a voice as calm and ordinary as I could manage, whether she'd be attending the closing dinner with Noah's father, since spouses were welcome. She hesitated just long enough to confirm what I already suspected before telling me they would. Tyler helped me finalize everything. Sunday morning, a folder of transaction records and a letter from the studio's accountant confirming the transfers to Brianna's account had been authorized using Noah's login without my knowledge, just under $11,000 over 4 months, alongside a separate summary of the recurring gambling withdrawals Tyler had traced through the same account history. "I want to be there," Tyler said, "not to make a scene, just so you're not standing alone in a room full of people who think they know him." We arrived a few minutes past 7, Tyler in a dark suit, me in the same emerald dress from the showcase, some defiant part of me wanting Noah to see me in it again, somewhere he never expected. I found him near the bar, Brianna beside him in champagne silk, both laughing with 2 guests who had no idea what they were witnessing. A few tables away, Carol sat beside Noah's father, her eyes finding mine across the room a half second before Noah's did, her face going carefully, deliberately blank in a way that told me everything I needed to know about how long she'd been practicing that particular expression. Noah's face, when he saw me, moved through confusion, disbelief, and finally real fear. "Aubrey, what are you doing here? This is a company event." "I know exactly what it is," I said. "I've known since Friday. I saw you both from the ballroom downstairs, and I know about the account, Noah. All of it. Brianna's transfers, and the card room, and every message your mother's been deleting off her phone before I could ask her a single question." Carol went very still at her table. Noah's father, a quiet man named Richard, who had spent most of the evening half listening to a conversation 2 seats over, turned toward his wife with a question forming on his face that told me he'd understood exactly none of this until that exact second. Carol didn't look at him, Brianna's face drained of color entirely. "Mrs. Stone," she said quietly, "You never thought I'd notice," I said. "That seems to be a running theme this weekend." Tyler stepped forward with the folder, addressing the small cluster of colleagues who'd begun to notice the shift in the air. "I'm sorry to interrupt," he said. "Some of you should see this before the evening continues." He handed the first page to a silver-haired man I recognized as the regional director. "This is a record of transfers from Aubrey Stone's dance studio account, authorized using Noah Stone's login credentials. Without her knowledge, just under $11,000, part of it routed to this woman's personal account, part of it routed through an offshore gaming platform." The director's eyes moved from the page to Brianna, to Noah, back to the page, hardening with each line. "Is this accurate?" he asked Noah directly. "Did you divert funds from your wife's business without her knowledge to cover personal gambling losses?" Noah opened his mouth and closed it again, which was answer enough. "This isn't the place," he said, voice tight. "Aubrey, we can talk at home." "We could have," I said. 6 years of home. You chose this instead. So I'm finishing it somewhere just as public as you started it." Carol rose from her seat, crossing toward us with the particular urgency of a woman trying to contain damage before it spread further. "Aubrey, please," she said quietly. "Whatever's happened between you and Noah, this isn't the place to air it in front of his colleagues." I turned to her directly for the first time. "You called my cell for 2 years instead of his," I said. "On every night, he was somewhere he shouldn't have been. So I'd never have a reason to ask him a hard question at the exact moment it mattered. That's not protecting your son, Carol. That's just choosing, every single time, to protect him instead of me." She had no answer for that, either. And for the first time in 6 years, I watched her carefully composed expression fully break apart in front of other people. Brianna's voice came out small. "Noah, tell me this isn't true. You said your finances were separate from her business entirely." He didn't answer her either, and I watched her realize, standing in that ballroom, that the man who told her one version of his life had quietly been living 2 different ones underneath it, same as he had with me. More colleagues drifted closer. The polished dinner shifted into something else. Low voices, sideways glances, the director already stepping away with the folder, phone pressed to his ear. Noah caught my arm as I turned to leave. "Aubrey, please, you're destroying everything I've built." "No," I told him. "You destroyed it. The night you decided my studio's money and my trust and 6 years of marriage were worth less than a card room you couldn't walk away from and a woman you met in my own lobby." He didn't have an answer for that either. I left with Tyler beside me, taking the stairs instead of waiting for the elevator, needing the motion. We ended up back in my hotel room, the one I'd booked for the championship weekend, both of us still in our formal clothes. Tyler stood near the window a long moment before he turned around, and there was something in his face I'd spent 6 years refusing to name. "I should have told you years ago," he said. "Not just about the restaurant, everything else." I told myself loyalty to Noah meant staying quiet about the one thing that would have actually protected you. I didn't answer him with words. I crossed the room, my hand finding his collar. And for the first time in 6 years, I let myself want something without arguing myself out of it. His hands found my waist, careful at first, then not careful at all. 6 years of unspoken glances collapsing into something neither of us tried to stop. The lamp knocked sideways onto the carpet, his jacket already gone, my dress halfway down my shoulder before either of us thought about the door. Neither of us heard it open. Noah stood frozen in the doorway, a keycard still in his hand, the master key from years of traveling together that he had apparently never returned. He'd come to beg me to reconsider, to explain that Brianna meant nothing, that the money was a mistake he intended to fix before I noticed. Whatever he'd planned to say died in his throat the instant the door swung wide enough to show him exactly what he was interrupting. His wife and his oldest friend on the bed, past the point of pretending it was anything else. The room dim enough that he was left with shapes and motion rather than detail, which did nothing to soften what he understood in a single, silent second. "You," he said quietly, and it wasn't a question. Tyler didn't stop, didn't scramble for an explanation, only turned his head enough to meet Noah's eyes over my shoulder. "Your back's been turned for years, Noah," he said. "You just never noticed anyone else was still standing there." Noah looked at me last. Whatever he saw in my face made him step back into the hallway without a word, the door swinging shut behind him with a soft, final click that felt, in that moment, more like the actual end of my marriage than any argument could have. I didn't see him again until the divorce paperwork, 3 weeks later. Word of the diverted funds reached Noah's employer within 48 hours. The company opened an internal review, and Noah was placed on leave before the week ended. He resigned 2 weeks later before the review reached a conclusion, which everyone in his professional circle understood correctly as a resignation shaped by writing already visible on the wall. Brianna left him within the same week. Carol called me once after the dinner, her voice smaller than I'd ever heard it, asking whether there was anything she could say that would make me understand why she'd done what she did. I told her the truth, that I believed she loved her son, and that loving him had never once required lying to me for 2 years straight, and that those were two different things she'd spent a long time refusing to separate. She didn't have an answer for that either. I filed for divorce 12 days after the conference dinner. I didn't ask for cruelty, only what I was owed: full repayment of the diverted funds, my share of the house, which I chose to sell rather than keep, because I didn't want to spend one more year inside walls that held 6 years of memories I could no longer trust. Noah tried once, about a month later, waiting near my car in the studio parking lot on a rainy evening, asking whether anything could have changed how this ended. "If you'd told me about Brianna the year you met her," I said, "or the card room the year it started, I'd have been devastated, but I'd have had the chance to decide what to do with that myself. What I can't forgive isn't that you fell for someone else, or that you struggled with something you couldn't control. It's that you spent years deciding, over and over, with your mother's help, that I didn't deserve to know the truth about my own life." He didn't have an answer for that either. Brianna reached out to me 3 weeks after the divorce filing, a short message asking if I would be willing to meet for coffee, no explanation attached beyond a single line telling me she understood if I said no. I almost did say no. Curiosity won out instead, along with something else I didn't fully recognize until I was sitting across from her: a quiet need to hear the version of the story that had been happening on the other side of a marriage I thought I knew completely. She looked smaller than she had in that champagne dress, tired in a way makeup couldn't quite cover. "He told me he was already separated when we met," she said, turning her coffee cup slowly on the table without drinking from it. "He told me the two of you were just staying together for appearances until the studio's loan was paid off. I know how that sounds now. I believed it for almost a year. I asked her if she'd known about the card room. She shook her head slowly, and something in her face told me the question had landed somewhere raw. "He asked to borrow money from me twice," she said. "I thought it was for a business investment. I found out about the gambling the same week you did, when his mother called me directly, of all people, asking if I could help talk him into stopping before it. Her words, before it got out of hand for everyone involved." Carol had known enough to call his mistress for help managing him and never once considered calling his wife with the truth instead. I sat with that for a moment. The particular vertigo of realizing the web of people quietly managing Noah's life had been wider and stranger than I'd understood even after the dinner. "I'm not telling you this so you'll feel sorry for me," Brianna said finally. "I know what I did. I knew he was married the whole time, and I made a choice every single week to keep seeing him anyway. I just needed you to know I didn't build a life around lying to you for the money. I built it around a version of him that turned out to be as fake to me as it apparently was to you." I didn't forgive her that afternoon, and I told her so honestly, but I believed her, and belief turned out to be enough to let something in my chest finally uncoil that I hadn't realized was still clenched tight around her specifically, separate from everything I still needed to work through about Noah himself. 6 months later, my studio looks almost exactly the same scuffed floor, the same mirrored wall where nervous beginners learn to stop watching their feet and start trusting their own balance. What changed is smaller, harder to photograph, but unmistakable once you stand inside it. Every account carries only my name now, fully separated from anyone I'd have to explain myself to. Tyler and I didn't rush anything, though word of that hotel room moved quietly through the small circle of people who used to call themselves Noah's friends. A few of them stopped calling him back entirely once the story settled, not out of loyalty to me so much as a quiet unwillingness to keep pretending they hadn't noticed things too. Small comments over the years they'd let slide the same way I had. What started as a moment neither of us fully planned became over those months something we both chose again, carefully, in daylight, with nothing left to hide. Tyler helped me refinance the studio's loan that winter, this time with only my name and his on the paperwork. A clean structure built from documents we read line by line together at my kitchen table. The same table where he'd first laid out the transfers to Brianna's account almost a year earlier. I noticed, signing those new papers, that I read every clause myself now, twice, before I let anyone hand me a pen. I still think sometimes about that Saturday night behind the curtain, watching a stranger wearing my husband's face laugh with a woman I once taught to dance, in a hotel he chose because he believed my whole attention would stay locked on a ballroom floor and never lift toward the truth standing 30 feet away. I used to think that was the worst thing that ever happened to my marriage. I don't think that anymore. I think it was the moment I finally stopped mistaking his confidence for honesty and stopped mistaking his mother's warmth for anything other than loyalty pointed permanently in one direction, and started trusting the parts of myself that had been keeping score long before I let myself look at the numbers directly. Noah didn't lose his marriage because I happened to glance the wrong way across a crowded ballroom. He lost it the moment he decided my trust was something he could spend down quietly, certain I'd never noticed the balance had changed until it was already gone, and certain his mother would keep the ledger hidden for as long as he needed her to. Some nights, closing the studio alone, I glance at the mirrored wall before I turn off the lights, and I see a woman standing there who no longer needs anyone else's permission or anyone else's version of the truth to know exactly what she is worth.
Thank you so much for watching. Drop a comment below, hit that subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.